I'd expect Miller to respect the tenets of democracy, and the entire United States government needs to bear in mind that Ghana is a sovereign country. We are opposed to cultural imperialism. Just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Department of State, when called upon to intervene in Israel, the Israeli campaign in Gaza Strip, said that it was not the position of the U.S. Department of State to intervene in the local matters of sovereign states. Ghana is not the 51st state of the United States. Ghana is a sovereign state on its own. The sovereign parliament of Ghana has passed a bill, and I think that Matthew Miller should be more interested in the loss of life of Americans' children in American schools to gun violence.
The Punch TV.
Adolfo no memo makwa baba ye the Punch TV so me so say any day di kan na dey hwe channel ya. Obe subscribe dey ama ye no like no share. We so jaw adwen share or comment section ho eso e dey akan ho. So I subscribe so that I beka se nyankopon on show. On tre wa shim. Abusian for family ameka say a story be na theater for mama nkofo twene seleni abasa. Social media no so dey okọ ho ache say baby abefa bia enam ho. And I say the Punch TV so dey emfa nkame ya hwefo. Inti yeso akọfa story na yeso ye dey abra ya hwefo say omonje no munti no so nhwe bi. No munti nsema yakoso ewo eye Ghana ayewe. Abusian for my uncle Ninkoti asem no emra ye ba ye de mu nchemu nyina esa ebebrem.
After that bill was passed, a spokesperson for the United States Department of State, that's Matthew Miller, has come to say that the United States is deeply troubled by the passage of the legislation. And he's saying that this will indeed affect a lot of persons who live in Ghana. What's your thought on his statement, especially looking at the fact that he's saying it could also hamper freedom of speech for Ghanaians?
I'd expect Miller to respect the tenets of democracy, and the entire United States government needs to bear in mind that Ghana is a sovereign country. We are opposed to cultural imperialism. Just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Department of State, when called upon to intervene in Israel, the Israeli campaign in Gaza Strip, said that it was not the position of the U.S. Department of State to intervene in the local matters of sovereign states. Ghana is not the 51st state of the United States. Ghana is a sovereign state on its own. The sovereign parliament of Ghana has passed a bill, and I think that Matthew Miller should be more interested in the loss of life of Americans' children in American schools to gun violence.
Are they concerned, you know?
He knows where it matters and not where it doesn't matter. They're not invited in Ghana's local politics where our parliament has passed the law.
Flowing from, you know, this question my colleague has asked, are there concerns about how this might affect relations between Ghana and America? Also, are there concerns about pushbacks, not just pushbacks, but seeing exactly how, you know, Uganda was treated in some measure after they had passed the bill? Are there concerns that Ghana might face that same treatment?
Well, Ghana is a proud African nation, first country in the sub-Saharan Africa to gain independence and lead the light for the rest of Africa. I expect the leaders of our country, the president of our country, to stand shoulder high and tell the American people, you either do business with us on our terms or you can walk. American businesses that operate in Ghana are not in Ghana because of LGBTQ. They're in Ghana because they make a profit. If you're an American business working in Ghana, you turn $100 million in profit every year. If you think that because we are protecting our cultural values and saying no to LGBTQ, you want to lose $100 million in profit, pack up and go. Another company will come into Ghana and do business. Ghana is a fertile ground for business. Look, Africa must begin to assert our rights. We're not puppets and stooges of the West. Look at Uganda. Uganda's economy is not as big as Ghana's economy. But per the Economist Intelligence Unit, the EIU, the 2024 report, Uganda is going to have the 6th fastest growing economy in Africa in 2024. And it's just the sheer hypocrisy of America and the West. Doing business with Saudi Arabia and doing business with Qatar. Qatar spent 22 billion US dollars hosting the World Cup in 2022. 18 billion out of those 22 billion went to American and Western businesses. Qatar buys over $1 billion of military hardware every year from America. The punishment for homosexuality in Qatar is death. Nigeria passed a same-sex marriage bill as far back as 2015. In fact, your bill is more punitive than Ghana's bill. In Nigeria, the punishment in your law for same-sex marriage is 14 years imprisonment. The maximum in Ghana's law is just 3 years. Has Nigeria's economy collapsed? Has Uganda's economy collapsed? We need to begin to stand. The American economy would not run and the Western economies will not run without African raw material. I think it's time we begin to look at adding value to our own raw material. Why should Ghanaian cocoa and Nigerian cocoa be traded on the New York Stock Exchange and not on the Ghanaian Stock Exchange and Nigerian Stock Exchange? If we begin to assert ourselves, these guys will know that they have to deal with us on equal terms. They're not doing us a favor. We're doing them a favor. The best doctors in the United States medical system are Ghanaians and Nigerians. The best economists on Wall Street are Ghanaians and Nigerians. They're not better than us. We sit in the same classroom with them and beat them every day. Academically, intellectually, we're better than them. But it's simply because we've not asserted our rights as Africans, because we want to go for cheap hand-me-downs. And I keep repeating, the IMF and the World Bank are banks. Banks operate by giving loans and making profit of the interest of those loans. So they should not threaten us. I mean, a bank should not be threatening the customer and saying, I won't give you a loan if you don't do what I want. If I don't come to you for a loan, you don't turn a profit. And so our economies are what run those multinational banks. And until we begin to assert ourselves and begin to trade more amongst ourselves, Ghana should begin to buy more rice from Nigeria, and Nigeria should begin to buy more salt from Ghana. We don't need to be going to the West for this. That's our problem as Africa.
Okay, Honorable Sam George, talk to us about why it was important for you to champion this cause and for this bill to be passed. And I ask this because we hear a number of people who will say, and same thing was said here in Nigeria as well, that there are other challenges that our countries have faced. And why is it important that the rights of people who are, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and more, and why is it that these LGBTQ plus people are the priority as opposed to all the other issues bedeviling the nation?
Well, Parliament is considering a lot of several other bills that we are doing, and we'll deal with everything. But let's bear in mind, the people who lose their identity have lost their nation. The European and American communities and society have failed because they've redefined family. They've lost the sense of what it means to be family. And that's what they want. It's that kind of mental aberration and mental disorder that they want to import into our countries. You cannot continue to deal with cultural imperialism and say that it is a secondary matter. Our identity as Ghanaians is a principal matter for us. And that's why we've pushed this bill. Because look, the Ghana AIDS Commission in 2021 spent $200 million buying antiretroviral drugs to take care of HIV/AIDS for people who choose to have sex, men who choose to have sex with men. And so the government had to spend $200 million. Now, do you know how many school buildings in my constituency $200 million would have built? Or how many hospital beds that would have created? And so when somebody says that it is not a pressing issue, it's because they don't understand the full effect of homosexuality on society. We're dealing with getting enough beds for our women to give birth when they are pregnant. And we should now begin to divert those resources to stitch up the backsides of men who have chosen to go and have sex with men when they begin to have anal tears and anal warts. I mean, why should we be spending resources on that? We should be channeling the resources into areas that we need. Go and check the American system and see how many people are committing suicide because of the effect of homosexuality. The CDC says that homosexuals are 400% more likely to be suicidal. Do you know the effect of suicide on the GDP of a country? Do you know the fact that the young man who walked into a school in the United States 3 months ago and shot up 22 kids was transgender? And this all came from a mental disorder because of him having undergone a gender change or gender reassignment when he was 8 years old? I mean, is this what we want to bring into our society? I grew up in Nigeria, and I knew, and growing up in Nigeria, I could walk to my neighbor's house and have a meal with them. My parents weren't scared when I attended Command Day Secondary School in Oshodi at Nafrik Barracks. They knew I was going to go to school and come back. They weren't afraid that their son was going to get killed by a child who has been affected mentally because he's transgendered. And kids in my constituency in Ghana today go to school, play on the way back home, and the parents are safe. The parents are able to contribute to Ghana's economic development because they know their children are safe. We're not going to just look, even on the African continent. Which country has the highest crime rate? South Africa. Why? Because they've embraced homosexuality. It's one of the growing factors in that country. Look at every country that has embraced this and look at what has happened to their crime rate. This has ripple effects on society as a whole. We're not going to import the sickness and troubles of another country. We've got enough on our hands in Ghana and in Africa.
All right. Let's look at the role of media influencers, social media influencers. They've also been at the forefront, beating the drum for supporting the LGBTQ plus community. Does this law in any way touch on the freedom to canvass for the community, either on social media space, as we've seen, that's quite proliferating. It's everywhere. We see it in acting, we see it in glamoring and so on, even in mansions and so on. Does this law touch on any aspect of that for influencers in Ghana?
Absolutely. We've gone after all technological and media platforms and said that you cannot use technological and media platforms to propagate stuff that is illegal in Ghana. So companies like DSTV, for example, will have to be careful about the kind of movies that they show in Ghana. And Ghana is not going to be the first country where they do that. We're not going to be the first country where we're going to say the kind of content you show on TV must be censored because this is not allowed. In every other country where they choose to protect their cultural values, there are things you cannot show. And for social media influencers, you cannot be a social media influencer and creating content that is contrary to the laws of the land. For example, Ghana has anti-money laundering laws. We have anti-terrorism laws and anti-vigilantism laws. You can't be a content producer right now and say that because you're a content producer or a social media influencer, you're producing content that promotes money laundering. The law would deal with you. So if we've passed the legislation that prohibits LGBTQ advocacy, and in fact, if you look at our bill, the punishment for advocacy is the strictest punishment in the bill. The punishment for advocacy is higher than the punishment for the act itself, because we want to protect the innocence of our children. And so everybody's going to be compelled to comply with the law. You either comply with it or you leave.
Are there fears that this might in some way increase some form of discrimination or extrajudicial treatment for people who are living or who are LGBTQ plus? And I ask this because sometimes there isn't a surefire way to determine who a person is just by looking at them. And there have been people who are, for men who are effeminate or women who are more masculine, and some would argue that this might make them become targets or have targets at their back. So is this a concern that Ghanaians should be worried about?
Well, for the first time in Ghana, we have a legislation that protects the fundamental human rights to a fair trial of persons living with LGBTQ. I'm not going to run and play the ostrich and say I haven't seen instances where persons have been assaulted in an extrajudicial manner because of accusations or allegations of them being members of the LGBTQ community. But when you read this legislation, we actually impose, I think in section 18 or 19, we actually impose a punishment of up to 3 years on anybody who carries out extrajudicial treatment. So if you suspect somebody is guilty of falling foul of the law, the person must have their day in court, in a competent court of jurisdiction with a lawyer.
Yama owi akwa baba Mansa Media College. Mansa Media College a school power a TV so any radio so dwumadie ya so ye e Kumase atonsu baby a uwo bia o pese ba Mansa Media College na be hu dwumadie yedi ne hono a yentie dwumadie yedi no Mansa Media College
se usua bribi wo media mu ana o pese ohunu bribi biara e fa media ho ensu eche kra
Mansa Media College e wo homa
ye wa achechefo a wa kwadiri yie wa ditwemu na in studio ni ye newsroom de editwam wonsam twemu no ye kire bribi ti se kasebo akenkan ni sinitwa ni bebru a ekeka ho wo multimedia mu nso ye kire bribi ti se sini mfoni asiesie mfoni twa ni bebra ekeka ho yebetumi nso aboa ama wode na otwepe asunya biribi wo nkitahodie adwuma ahodo nyinaa mu esanse ye wo yankasa foni nti abri biara yema ya adesuafo kwan ma okọ yode ya twerɛ won adesua dan mu no
ahwefo ehu ekame ese obi biara a wole bosomtwe ase enim agbakosema efa nsuo ihu menya abofra ketewa bi wa ha ono so se onim agbakosema efa le bosomtwe ho
abusuafo ye mama kwaba eba Ghana Pages TV so emra so se the trending issues ne ekoso ewo abe for time fidie ni so ebe somo midin na naje wa akode
Amansan Media College. Ya ma de we hia bia wo nkotahudie mu.